They never found his body, but they found the blood. So much blood. For 47 years, I believed my James was murdered until that mysterious package arrived on my doorstep with a postmark from Mexico. That package changed everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and the strange twists of fate that shape our lives. Hello there. I'm Geraldine Jerry Whitaker, 78 years young. Most folks around Oak Ridge still call me Miss Jerry, though I haven't been a miss for quite some time now. I was born Geraldine May Harrington in 1947 in the small town of Oak Ridge, Vermont. It was the kind of place where everybody knew your name, your business, and probably what you had for breakfast that morning. A place where secrets were as rare as snow in July, or so we all thought. My father ran Harrington's Pharmacy on Main Street, the only pharmacy for 20 miles in any direction. It was more than just a place to fill prescriptions. It was the heart of our community. With its polished wood counters, soda fountain, and those spinning red vinyl stools that we children loved to twirl on until we got dizzy, that pharmacy was where folks came to gossip, to celebrate, and to find comfort when times were hard. My mother, bless her heart, was what folks called delicate. She suffered from terrible migraines that would keep her bedridden for days at a time, the curtains drawn against even the faintest light. So from the time I was tall enough to reach the cash register, I helped Daddy at the store. By 16, I could mix any soda combination you could dream up, recommend the right remedy for everything from diaper rash to gout, and count pills faster than most trained pharmacists. Now, I know some of you watching are probably thinking, another small-town story? But honey, sometimes the deepest secrets hide in the smallest places. If you're watching this from a small town yourself, drop a comment and let me know where you're from. I love knowing who's listening to my story. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. Oak Ridge, 1965. I just turned 18 that spring, fresh out of high school and full of dreams bigger than our little town could hold. I'd been accepted to the University of Vermont for the fall semester, the first Harrington woman to go to college. Daddy was so proud, he told everyone who came into the pharmacy, even Mrs. Peterson, who was just there for her bunion pads. Mama was worried, of course. What if you meet some city boy and move away forever? She'd fret, smoothing my hair like I was still a child. The plan was for me to work at the pharmacy all summer, saving every penny for textbooks and whatever else college girls needed. I had a neat little notebook where I kept track of my earnings, watching the numbers climb week by week. I'd serve milkshakes and cherry cokes to everyone who came through, listening to their stories, their complaints, their gossip. Old Mr. Finley would come in every Wednesday for his heart medicine and tell me about fighting in World War II. The Henderson twins would pool their allowance for a shared root beer float every Friday after their piano lessons. And Mrs. Collins, who lived alone since her husband passed, would stop by almost daily, ostensibly for small purchases, but really just for someone to talk to. Life had a predictable rhythm in Oak Ridge, comforting in its way, but I was ready for something new. Something exciting. Be careful what you wish for, as they say. I had my share of boys asking me to the movies or to go parking by Miller's Pond, but none of them made my heart skip a beat. Billy Johnson had been sweet on me since 3rd grade, and I did let him take me to prom, but it was like dancing with my brother. Kenny Matthews from the football team was handsome enough, but all he could talk about was his passing record and how he'd be playing for the big leagues someday. Then there was Sam Porter, whose family owned the apple orchard outside town, thoughtful and kind. But when he kissed me after the spring festival, I felt nothing, not a single spark. Mama said I was too picky. Romance isn't all fireworks and butterflies, Geraldine May, she'd lecture. It's finding a steady, reliable man who'll be a good provider. But I'd read too many novels smuggled under my bed covers by flashlight, dreamed too many dreams to settle for merely steady and reliable. Then came that sweltering July day, July 17th, 1965 to be exact. Some dates are burned into your memory forever. The thermometer outside the pharmacy window read 91 degrees by 10 in the morning. The electric fan behind the counter pushed the hot air around without cooling it much. My cotton dress was sticking to my back, and I'd pinned my hair up off my neck, wishing for the millionth time that Daddy would invest in one of those new air conditioning units. That's when James Calloway walked into my daddy's pharmacy, the little bell over the door announcing his arrival. He wasn't from Oak Ridge. You could tell by the way he carried himself. Confident but not cocky, with a gentle southern drawl that made my knees weak. He wore khaki pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms tanned and strong from outdoor work. But it was his face that caught me. Not classically handsome, but interesting. Intelligent eyes the color of a summer sky, laugh lines already forming at their corners despite him being so young, and a small scar through his right eyebrow that I would later learn came from falling out of an apple tree when he was 10. He smiled when he saw me, and Lord help me. Everything inside me went still and quiet, like the world pausing between heartbeats. "Miss, I think I've underestimated the Vermont sun," he said, his voice like warm honey over gravel. "I'm afraid I'm red as a lobster and twice as cooked." I couldn't help but laugh, suddenly conscious of my pinned-up hair and damp collar. "You must be passing through," I said, reaching for the calamine lotion we kept behind the counter. "Locals know better than to spend all day outside without a hat." "Guilty as charged," he admitted, leaning slightly against the counter. Up close, I could see how bad his sunburn really was. His nose and cheeks were bright red, beginning to peel across the bridge of his nose. "I'm up from Virginia for the summer, helping my uncle with his construction business, building the new library over on Maple Street. Will this stuff help?" He gestured to the pink bottle in my hand. "It's a start," I said, suddenly all business to hide the flutter in my stomach. "But you'll want to stay out of the sun for a day or two, drink plenty of water, and maybe take some aspirin for the inflammation." I gathered the items as I spoke, placing them on the counter between us. "You sound like you know your medicine," he said, watching me with those summer sky eyes. "I should. I've been helping in this pharmacy since I could walk." Every day after that, James would find some reason to stop by the pharmacy. Sometimes it was for a soda, sometimes for aspirin or bandages. Construction work was hard on the hands, he'd say, showing me his blisters like badges of honor. Sometimes he'd just come in for a cold Coca-Cola, claiming our fountain served them colder than anywhere else in town. And every day, I found myself watching the clock, counting the minutes until he might walk through that door. Daddy noticed, of course. Nothing escaped Richard Harrington's attention, especially when it came to his only daughter. "That Virginia boy seems to need a lot of pharmacy supplies," he commented one evening as we closed up shop. I busied myself wiping down the counter, hoping he wouldn't notice the blush creeping up my cheeks. "He works construction, Daddy. It's dangerous work," Daddy just hummed thoughtfully, counting the day's receipts. "Seems to me his injuries always happen right before your shift ends." I couldn't argue with that. For 3 weeks straight, James had appeared like clockwork at 10 minutes to 5, just as I was preparing to close the soda fountain. It was Madeline Cooper, my best friend since kindergarten, who finally pushed me to do something about it. Maddie worked at the town library and came to the pharmacy on her lunch breaks. "For heaven's sake, Jerry," she said, stirring her iced tea with more force than necessary. "The poor boy's going to go broke buying sodas and bandages he doesn't need. Either tell him you're not interested or agree to see him properly." "What if he's just being friendly?" I worried, twisting my napkin into a knot. "What if I'm reading too much into it?" Maddie rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might strain something. "No man needs 3 bottles of aspirin in 1 month unless he's courting the pharmacist's daughter." She was right, of course. So the next time James came in, for mints this time, claiming his uncle complained about his coffee breath, I took a deep breath and jumped. "You know," I said casually, ringing up his purchase, "there's a showing of The Sound of Music at the Majestic Theater on Friday night. I hear it's really something." The smile that spread across his face could have lit up all of Oak Ridge during a power outage. "Miss Harrington," he said, placing a hand over his heart, "are you asking me on a date?" "Maybe I am, Mr. Calloway," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. "Unless you'd rather spend another evening buying things you don't need." He laughed then, a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill up all the empty spaces in the room. "I'd be honored. Though I should confess, I really did need all those aspirin. Your Vermont mosquitoes seem to have a particular taste for Southern blood." That Friday changed everything. James picked me up in his uncle's truck, freshly washed for the occasion. He wore a button-down shirt and slacks, his dark hair slicked back with Brill cream, a small bunch of wildflowers in his hand. "For the prettiest girl in Vermont," he said, handing them to me at the door. The movie was wonderful, but I barely noticed Julie Andrews dancing through the Austrian countryside. I was too aware of James beside me in the dark theater, the way he smelled of soap and sunshine, the careful way he held my hand when he finally worked up the courage to take it. After the movie, we went to Donovan's diner for milkshakes. We sat in a booth by the window, talking until Mr. Donovan started stacking chairs on tables, a not-so-subtle hint that it was closing time. We talked about everything: his childhood in Richmond with 3 older sisters who dressed him up like a doll, my dreams of becoming a pharmacist like my father, the books we loved, the places we wanted to see. By August, we were spending every evening together. James would pick me up after my shift in his uncle's truck, and we'd drive up to Firefly Ridge to watch the sunset. It became our special place, a grassy overlook above the town where you could see for miles in every direction. He'd bring his guitar sometimes, playing old folk songs and telling me about his dreams of becoming an architect. "I want to design homes," he told me one evening as we lay on a blanket, watching the stars appear one by one. Not just houses, but real homes. Places where people can build lives and make memories. Places that will stand for generations. He turned to look at me, his eyes serious in the fading light. "I want to build beautiful things that last," he said. And the way he looked at me when he said it made me believe I might be one of those things. My mama worried, of course. She'd peek through the curtains every night when James brought me home, timing how long we sat in the truck before I came inside. "Summer romances burn hot and fast, Mary," she warned me one night as I got ready for bed, my lips still tingling from James's goodnight kiss. "That boy will be gone come September, and you'll be left with nothing but memories and maybe a broken heart." "It's not like that, Mama," I insisted, brushing my hair with exactly 100 strokes like she'd taught me. "James is different. They're all different," she sighed, turning down my bedspread. "Until they're not." But James wasn't like other summer boys. As August turned to September and the leaves began their first hints of change, I waited for the inevitable goodbye. The library was nearly finished. His uncle's crew would be moving on to another job in New Hampshire. James would return to Virginia to finish his last year of college. I prepared myself for the heartbreak Mama had predicted, determined to be brave when the time came. The last Friday in August, James picked me up as usual, but something was different. He seemed nervous, checking his pocket repeatedly, taking turns too fast in his uncle's old truck. "Is everything all right?" I asked as we drove up the winding road to Firefly Ridge. "You seem jittery." "Just excited to see the sunset," he said, his voice an octave higher than normal. "They're saying it's going to be a good one tonight." It was a perfect evening, the kind that Vermont specializes in during late summer. The air was crisp but not cold, scented with pine and wildflowers. The sky was putting on a show, bands of gold and crimson stretching across the horizon. James spread our usual blanket beneath the old oak tree, but instead of sitting down, he remained standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "James Calloway, what on earth is the matter with you?" I finally asked, laughing at his strange behavior. "You look like you're about to jump out of your skin." He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and then, to my complete surprise, he got down on one knee right there on Firefly Ridge, the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Geraldine May Harrington," he said, his voice steady now despite the trembling in his hands. "I came to Vermont to build a library, but I found something more precious than any building. I found you, and I don't want to leave you behind." From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. Simple but beautiful, a small diamond set in yellow gold. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, his eyes never leaving mine. "She gave it to me before she passed last year, said I should save it for a girl who made me feel like I could fly. That's how I feel with you, Jerry, like I could soar right off this ridge and never come down." My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Summer romances didn't end with proposals. Summer boys didn't look at you like you were their whole world. "I know this is fast," he continued, when I didn't immediately respond. "I know we're young. I know there's a lot to figure out. But I also know, with more certainty than I've ever known anything, that you're the one I want to build a life with. So what do you say, Mary?" "Will you marry me?" I didn't hesitate for a second before saying yes. I threw my arms around his neck, nearly knocking him over, laughing and crying all at once. He slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a little loose, but I didn't care. Nothing had ever felt so right. We stayed on that ridge until the stars came out, making plans, dreaming dreams, stealing kisses between excited conversations about our future. The world seemed so full of possibility, stretched out before us like the twinkling lights of Oak Ridge below. Reality, of course, had to be faced eventually. James would still have to return to Virginia to finish his architecture degree. I would still start at the University of Vermont. We would have to wait. "It's just 1 year," James said as we reluctantly drove back toward town, my head on his shoulder, his grandmother's ring catching the moonlight on my finger. "I'll graduate next June. We can get married that same weekend. Start our life together right away." When we pulled up in front of my house, all the lights were still on, unusual for that time of night. Mama and Daddy were waiting in the living room, their faces tight with concern that shifted to confusion when they saw our matching grins. "Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Harrington," James said formally, holding my hand tightly in his. "I've asked your daughter to marry me, and she's done me the great honor of accepting." There was a long moment of silence. Then Daddy stood, his expression unreadable. "And when exactly were you planning to ask for my blessing, young man?" James's face fell. "Sir, But then Daddy's stern expression cracked, and he smiled, clapping James on the shoulder. "I'm just teasing you, son, though I'd have appreciated a heads up." "Richard," Mama scolded, but she was smiling too, rising to hug me. "Oh, my baby girl, engaged." "We don't expect you to pay for a big wedding, Daddy," I said quickly. "We're thinking something small, next June after James graduates." Mama was already in full planning mode. "June is a lovely month for a wedding. We'll have it in the church, of course. Reverend Taylor will officiate. You'll need a dress. We could alter mine, though the style might be a bit dated now." "Helen," Daddy cut in gently, "maybe let the kids catch their breath before you plan the whole wedding." It was nearly midnight when James finally left, after we'd talked through all the practical details with my parents. He would return to Virginia in 3 days to start his final year at university. I would begin classes at UVM the following week. We would write letters every week and call when we could afford it. He would come up for Thanksgiving if possible. I might visit his family during Christmas break. And in June, after his graduation, we would marry. James went back to Virginia with a piece of my heart tucked safely beside his own. I kept myself busy with college preparations, showing off my ring to Maddie and my other friends, collecting recipes and household tips from Mama and the other ladies at church. We wrote letters every week, planned our future in blue ink on white paper. His letters smelled faintly of drafting paper and the sandalwood cologne he wore, each one a treasure I read again and again, until the paper grew thin along the folds. "Just 1 more year of waiting," he'd write. 1 more year, and then forever. I started classes at UVM, throwing myself into my studies to distract from the James-shaped hole in my days. I was studying pharmacy, following in Daddy's footsteps, though James teased that I'd be the more successful Harrington someday. "You'll probably discover some miracle cure," he wrote, while I'm still trying to figure out how to draw a straight line without a ruler. We saw each other at Thanksgiving. His parents insisted on driving him all the way to Vermont to meet the family of their future daughter-in-law. His mother, Martha, was a petite woman with James's blue eyes and a southern warmth that filled our home with laughter. His father, George, was more reserved, but I caught him and Daddy talking late into the night over glasses of bourbon, seeming to find common ground despite their different backgrounds. At Christmas, I took the train to Richmond, staying in their beautiful old colonial home with its wraparound porch and stained glass windows in the entryway. I met James's 3 sisters, Elizabeth, Anna, and Rebecca, who welcomed me like I was already family. They showed me all the embarrassing photos of James as a chubby-cheeked baby and a gangly teenager, told me stories of how he'd built elaborate forts in the backyard and designed tree houses that their father had helped construct. He was always drawing, Elizabeth, the oldest, told me as we prepared Christmas dinner together. Buildings, bridges, cities he invented in his head. Our parents' friends would ask what James would be when he grew up, and he always said, "I'm going to build beautiful things," even when he was 5 years old. Our separation grew harder after those holidays, having been reminded of what we were missing. The letters became more frequent, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. We counted down the days, 100, then 75, then 50, marking them off calendars on our respective walls over 500 miles apart. Spring of 1966 was when everything fell into place. James wrote that he'd aced his final design project and was top of his class. He had a job lined up with an architecture firm in Burlington, only an hour's drive from Oak Ridge. His professor had connections at the firm and had recommended James personally. The starting salary wasn't much, but it would be enough for us to live comfortably, especially once I finished my degree as well. We found a little rental house with a garden out back, perfect for starting our life together. The landlord was Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store in Burlington and had known my father for years. He gave us a good rate and promised we could paint the rooms any colors we liked. James had already sketched out plans for built-in bookcases he wanted to add, furniture arrangements for each room, even a little vegetable garden for the backyard. My dress was finished by early June. Ivory satin with lace my grandmother had brought from Ireland when she immigrated as a young bride. Mama and I had worked on it together all through the spring, staying up late with cups of tea and the radio playing softly in the background, stitching pearls onto the bodice and adjusting the hem to fall just so. The first time I tried on the completed dress, Mama cried, and even Daddy looked misty-eyed when he peeked in from the hallway. The invitations were sent, ivory cards with elegant script announcing the union of Geraldine May Harrington and James Edward Calloway on June 25, 1966, at First Presbyterian Church of Oak Ridge. The church was booked. Reverend Taylor had met with us multiple times to discuss the ceremony, and my daddy had ordered a special cake from the fancy bakery 2 towns over. 3 tiers with buttercream frosting and fresh flowers to match my bouquet of daisies and baby's breath. Everything was ready. After 10 months of separation, hundreds of letters, and thousands of miles traveled, we were just days away from beginning our life together. The night before James was set to drive up from Virginia, we had our last phone call as an engaged couple. Long-distance calls were expensive, so we'd limited ourselves to 1 call a month, saving the money for our future together instead. But this call was special. The last one before we'd be together for good. "This time tomorrow, I'll be there," he said, his voice thick with emotion through the slightly staticky connection. "And in 2 weeks, you'll be Mrs. Calloway." "I can hardly believe it's finally happening," I said, twisting the phone cord around my finger, my grandmother's ring catching the light from my bedside lamp. 10 months felt like 10 years. "The longest 10 months of my life," he agreed, "but worth every minute. I've got everything packed, my clothes, my drafting tools, all your letters tied up with that blue ribbon you sent me for Christmas. Drive safe," I told him, suddenly anxious. It was a long drive from Richmond to Oak Ridge, especially in his uncle's old truck that had seen better days. "I've waited this long, I can wait 1 more day. I'll be careful, I promise. I'm leaving at first light. Should be there by dinner time. I can't wait to hold you, Mary. To see that smile in person instead of just dreaming about it. Just 1 more day," I whispered. "I love you to the moon and back, Mary," he said, using the phrase that had become our signature sign-off in each letter, each phone call. "I love you to the stars and beyond, James," I answered, just like I always did. Those were the last words we ever spoke to each other. The trunk, with all his clothes nearly folded inside. His wallet was on the front seat, with $43 inside and a photo of me tucked behind his driver's license. But James was gone, and on the gravel beside the car, blood. Not much, they said, but enough to worry. Enough to make them bring in dogs and search the woods nearby. Enough to make them drag the nearby creek. Enough to make everyone think the worst. The police had theories. Maybe he was robbed by hitchhikers. Maybe he stopped to help someone who turned on him. But there were no witnesses. No clues beyond that small bloodstain. Just a disappearing act that left a hole in my heart the size of Vermont. The wedding date came and went. The white dress stayed in its bag in my closet, a ghost of dreams that never came true. You know, the hardest part wasn't the waiting. It was the pity. You could see it in people's eyes at the grocery store, at church, even at Daddy's pharmacy. Poor Jerry Harrington, left at the altar. Must have been something wrong with her, they whispered. Maybe he got cold feet. Maybe he found someone else. Nobody wanted to say what we were all thinking, that something terrible had happened to James, that no man who loved a woman the way he loved me would just vanish into thin air 2 weeks before our wedding. Sheriff Miller organized search parties that combed the woods for miles around where they found James's car. The Virginia State Police dragged every pond and creek within 10 miles. They interviewed gas station attendants, diner waitresses, motel clerks, anyone who might have seen James on his journey north. They found nothing. Not a single witness who remembered seeing him after he left his parents' home in Richmond. The FBI got involved after 3 weeks. Agent Donovan was a serious man with tired eyes who'd seen too many missing persons cases. He set up a temporary office in our town hall and interviewed everyone who knew James. "Miss Harrington," he told me after a month of investigation, "sometimes people disappear because they want to. Have you considered that possibility?" I slapped him, right across the face. My daddy had to pull me away. I'm not proud of it now, but back then, the very suggestion that James had abandoned me deliberately felt like someone twisting a knife in my heart. Summer turned to fall. Fall gave way to winter. The searches stopped. The FBI packed up their temporary office. James's parents went back to Virginia, grief etched into lines on their faces. His mother hugged me before they left. "He loved you more than anything in this world, Jerry," she whispered. "Something terrible happened to our boy. I feel it in my bones." By Christmas, most folks stopped mentioning James around me. They thought it was kindness, but their silence just made his absence louder. I found myself clinging to the smallest things. His letters tied with blue ribbon, the flannel shirt he'd left at my house once after a bonfire, the engagement photo that ran in the Oak Ridge Weekly before he vanished. Daddy worried about me. I'd lost weight, couldn't sleep without nightmares. I'd see James walking through fog, calling my name, but I could never reach him. "You need to get away from here, Jerry," Daddy said one night. "This town is full of ghosts for you now." My Aunt Clara lived in Boston. She worked as a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital and had a spare room in her apartment. "Just for a few months," Daddy pleaded, "until spring comes, until you can breathe again." I agreed, not because I wanted to leave, but because I couldn't bear the weight of everyone's concern anymore. I packed one suitcase, tucked James's letters inside my coat pocket, and boarded a Greyhound bus in January of 1967. The snow was falling as we pulled away from Oak Ridge, covering everything in clean white silence. Boston was a different world, loud, crowded, indifferent to my pain. Nobody looked at me with pity there. Nobody knew I was the girl whose fiancé vanished. I was just another face in the crowd, and there was a strange comfort in that anonymity. Aunt Clara worked night shifts, so I had the small apartment to myself most evenings. After a few weeks of staring at the walls, I decided to find a job. There was a small bookstore near Harvard Square that had a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The owner, Mrs. Abernathy, was a widow with silver hair and kind eyes who didn't ask too many questions. She just handed me a broom and showed me how she liked the books arranged. Working at the bookstore saved me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I lost myself in shelving books, recommending novels to customers, ordering new titles. When my thoughts turned dark, I'd pick up a book and escape into someone else's story for a while. And somehow, day by day, hour by hour, I began to build a life without James. By summer, Aunt Clara had introduced me to night school. "You're smart as a whip, Jerry," she said. "Why not take some classes? Nursing school is always looking for bright young women." I enrolled in prerequisite courses at Boston Community College. The first time I aced an anatomy test, I felt a flicker of something I thought had died with James. Pride, ambition, hope. Don't misunderstand. I never stopped looking for answers. Every month I called Sheriff Miller back in Oak Ridge. Every month he had nothing new to tell me. I wrote to the FBI quarterly, hoping something had crossed their desk that might connect to James. I scanned newspapers for stories of unidentified men found or mysteries solved. I kept a small box of newspaper clippings about similar disappearances, searching for patterns that never emerged. I became a licensed practical nurse in 1969, specializing in emergency care. There was something about the urgency of the ER, the focus required, that quieted the constant questions in my head. When my hands were busy saving lives, my heart could rest from its endless searching. That spring, I met Thomas Whitaker in the emergency room. He was a resident physician, tall, thoughtful, with gentle hands and a quiet voice. He'd come in to assess a patient I was stabilizing, a young man who'd been in a motorcycle accident. After we got the patient to surgery, Dr. Whitaker asked if I wanted to grab coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "Just coffee," I said firmly. I wasn't ready for anything more. Just coffee. He agreed with a small smile. Coffee turned into lunch the following week. Lunch turned into dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the harbor. Thomas never pushed, never pried. When I finally told him about James, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, he just listened. He didn't offer theories or platitudes. He just took my hand and sat with me in silence as the waves crashed against the shore. "Sometimes there are no answers, Jerry," he said finally. "Sometimes we have to learn to live with the questions." It took another year before I agreed to officially date Thomas. Almost 2 before I could kiss him without feeling like I was betraying James. When he proposed in the fall of 1971, I panicked, ran out of the restaurant, stood shaking on the sidewalk as memories of another proposal, another ring, another life overwhelmed me. Thomas found me there, gave me space, didn't make me feel broken for still grieving a man 5 years gone. "I'm not trying to replace him, Jerry," he said quietly. "I'm just asking for a chance to build something new, something different." I said yes 3 weeks later. We married in Boston in a small ceremony. No white dress, no church, just a civil ceremony at City Hall with Aunt Clara and a few friends from the hospital. I kept my engagement ring from James in a small box in my dresser drawer. Thomas knew and understood. Some wounds never fully heal, you just build your life around them. We moved to Hartford, Connecticut in 1972, where Thomas had accepted a position as a pediatrician. I worked part-time in a clinic for low-income families, found purpose in helping children who had so little. We bought a small house with a garden where I planted roses. We adopted a stray cat we named Midnight. We built a quiet life together, full of small joys and ordinary days. But every year, on what would have been my anniversary with James, I would take the day off work. I would open the box of his letters, read them one by one, and allow myself to remember, to grieve, to wonder. Thomas never asked what I did on those days. He just made sure there were fresh flowers on the table when I came downstairs, a silent acknowledgement of the ghost that still lived in our marriage. Life has a way of moving forward, even when part of you stays frozen in time. Thomas and I tried to have children, but it wasn't in the cards for us. After 3 miscarriages, the doctors advised against trying again. I'd like to say I handled it with grace, but the truth is, I raged against this second profound loss. Hadn't I already given up enough? Hadn't fate already taken its pound of flesh from my heart? Thomas suggested adoption in 1975. There were so many children who needed homes, especially after the Vietnam War. We adopted our daughter Lily when she was just 3 months old, a beautiful baby girl whose mother was too young and too poor to care for her. The moment they placed her in my arms, I felt a healing I didn't know was possible. This tiny person needed me whole, not broken. And so I found strength I didn't know I had. Motherhood consumed me for years. Lily was a spirited child, curious, stubborn, with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Raising her left little time for dwelling in the past. The box of James's letters moved from my bedside table to my dresser drawer, then to a chest in the attic as Lily grew and our house filled with evidence of our life together. Her drawings, Thomas's medical journals, photo albums of birthdays and Christmases. Thomas's practice thrived. We moved to a larger house in a good school district when Lily was 7. I went back to nursing part-time, working at a women's health clinic 3 days a week while Lily was at school. We took summer vacations to Cape Cod, built sandcastles on the beach, collected seashells that still sit in jars on my windowsill. We were happy, genuinely, deeply happy. But James was never truly gone. He lived in the corner of my mind, in questions that had no answers. Sometimes, I'd see a man on the street with his build, his walk, and my heart would stop for a beat before I realized it couldn't be him. Sometimes I'd dream of him so vividly that I'd wake with tears on my cheeks, and Thomas would hold me without asking why. He always knew. Lily learned about James when she was 12. She found the box of letters while looking for Christmas decorations in the attic, brought it downstairs with innocent curiosity. "Mom, who's James?" she asked, and the room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Thomas took her out for ice cream so I could compose myself, and that night we sat her down and told her the story, a simplified version, appropriate for her age. "So you loved two men?" she asked, her young face serious. "I still do," I admitted, glancing at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "It's possible to hold both in your heart, even though it's different kinds of love now." Lily thought about this, then asked the question that had haunted me for 17 years. "What do you think happened to him?" I told her the truth. "I don't know, sweetheart, and I've had to learn to live with not knowing." By the 1980s, James's case was considered cold. Sheriff Miller had retired years ago, and the new sheriff in Oak Ridge had never even heard of James Calloway when I called to check in. The FBI file had been archived somewhere in their vast system. James's parents had both passed away, his father in 1978, his mother in 1982. I attended both funerals, standing quietly at the back of the church, still the almost daughter-in-law after all those years. Life continued its relentless forward motion. Lily went to college in 1990, pre-med, following in her father's footsteps. Thomas's hair turned silver at the temples. My own began to streak with gray. We celebrated our 20th anniversary with a trip to Hawaii, walked on black sand beaches, and watched volcanoes smoke in the distance. I turned 43, then 44, then 50. The years accumulated like shells on a shore. In 1995, almost 30 years after James disappeared, I received a phone call from a detective in the Virginia State Police Cold Case Unit. They were reopening several unsolved cases from the 1960s using new DNA technology. Did I have anything of James's that might have his DNA? A hairbrush, perhaps? A toothbrush? I didn't. Everything of James's had been kept by his parents, and after their deaths, their house had been sold, their belongings dispersed or discarded. All I had were letters, paper and ink, no skin cells or hair follicles that might tell us who had left that blood beside his abandoned car. "We did find something interesting, though," the detective said. "In reviewing the original case files, we discovered that a man fitting James's description was admitted to a hospital in West Virginia the day after he disappeared. Severe head trauma, no identification. He died 3 days later without regaining consciousness." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Why wasn't this connected to James's case back then? Different jurisdictions, poor communication. The patient was listed as John Doe, cremated when no one claimed the body. But we found a photo in their records. He paused. "Mrs. Whitaker, I should warn you. Due to the nature of his injuries, it's difficult to make a positive identification." They sent the photo by certified mail. Thomas was with me when I opened it. The man in the hospital bed was unrecognizable, face swollen, bandaged, tubes everywhere. It could have been James. It could have been any young man with dark hair. "Do you think it's him?" Thomas asked quietly. "I don't know," I whispered. And that was the cruelest part. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. Another possibility that offered no closure. They exhumed the remains from a potter's field in Charleston later that year. DNA testing was still primitive then, and the results were inconclusive. Not enough viable material to compare to samples they'd taken from James's distant cousins. Another dead end. Another wound reopened, only to be left raw again. Lily married in 1997, a wonderful young doctor she'd met during residency. I helped her pick out her wedding dress, stood beside her as she studied her reflection in the bridal shop mirror. "Mom," she said suddenly, "are you thinking about your wedding that never happened?" "No," I told her, and it was mostly true. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am to be here with you now. I became a grandmother in 2000. Twins, a boy and a girl. James and Eleanor, they named them, without knowing the significance of that first name. When Lily told me their chosen names, I had to excuse myself to the hospital bathroom, where I wept silently, wondering at the strange circles life draws. Thomas retired in 2002. We sold the house in Hartford and moved to a smaller place on the Massachusetts coast. He took up woodworking. I joined a book club and volunteered at the local library. We settled into the rhythms of our golden years, walking the beach each morning, watching our grandchildren grow during weekend visits, making plans for small adventures while our health still allowed. In 2011, Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was advanced by the time they found it, as it so often is. 6 months, the oncologist told us in a sterile consultation room. Maybe a year with aggressive treatment. He lived for 8 months and 14 days. I nursed him at home, the way he wanted it. Our roles reversed. I became the doctor, he the patient. Lily came as often as she could, bringing the twins to make their grandfather smile, even on his darkest days. We talked about everything in those final months. Our life together, our regrets, few, our joys, many. And yes, we talked about James. "I've never been jealous of a ghost," Thomas told me one night as I adjusted his morphine drip. "I've always felt like he sent you to me somehow, like he knew I would love you the way you deserved." I kissed his forehead, thin skin over fragile bone. "I've loved 2 good men in my life," I said. "Most people don't even get one." After Thomas died, I thought about moving back to Vermont, back to Oak Ridge where it all began. But my life wasn't there anymore. My daughter, my grandchildren, my memories of Thomas, they were all rooted in New England now. So I stayed in our little coastal house, learned to sleep alone in our bed, adapted to the silence that followed me from room to room. The years passed more slowly without Thomas. I volunteered more hours at the library. I joined a widow's support group. I had Sunday dinners with Lily's family when they could make the drive up from Boston. I scattered Thomas's ashes in the sea, according to his wishes, and planted a maple tree in the backyard in his memory. Life continued, diminished, but still worth living. And then, in April of 2013, 47 years after James disappeared, a package arrived on my doorstep. The package was small, wrapped in brown paper, and secured with more tape than necessary. The postmark was from Guadalajara, Mexico. There was no return address, just my name and address written in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. I almost threw it away, thinking it was some kind of scam or mistake. But curiosity got the better of me. I cut through the layers of tape with kitchen scissors and unwrapped the paper to find a wooden box, hand-carved with intricate flowers along the edges. Inside, nestled in a bed of cotton, was a letter and a small leather journal. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper was thin, yellowed with age, and the handwriting was unsteady, but I recognized it immediately. I'd spent years reading that handwriting in treasured letters. "My dearest Mary," it began, the nickname only James had ever used for me. I had to sit down, the room spinning around me. I clutched the letter to my chest, afraid to read further, afraid not to. After several deep breaths, I continued. "If you're reading this, I have finally passed from this world, and Manuel, my friend and caretaker, has fulfilled his promise to send you these things. I've written this letter 100 times in my mind over the years, never finding the right words to explain the inexplicable. How does a man apologize for disappearing from the life of the woman he loves? What possible explanation could ease nearly 5 decades of uncertainty and pain? I was on my way to you that day in June, my car packed with everything I owned, my heart full of dreams of our future together. Just past the Virginia-West Virginia border, I stopped to help a man whose truck had broken down. 2 other men were with him, though I didn't see them at first. They attacked me, robbed me, beat me, and left me for dead in a ditch beside the road. A migrant farm worker found me the next morning. Instead of taking me to a hospital, he was afraid of authorities. He was undocumented and brought me to his brother's home. I had no identification. The thieves had taken everything. I was unconscious for days. When I woke, I remembered nothing. Not my name, not where I was going, not you. The head trauma had wiped my memory clean. The family nursed me back to physical health, but my mind remained a blank slate. They called me Miguel, took me with them when they returned to Mexico at the end of harvest season. I learned Spanish, worked odd jobs, eventually became a carpenter's apprentice. I built a life without knowing I had already had one. The memories came back slowly, in fragments and dreams. A flash of your smile, the sound of your laugh, a pharmacy counter and the smell of cherry soda. By the time I began to piece together who I was, nearly a decade had passed. I made inquiries through an American church mission in our village. learned that I had been declared dead in a hospital in West Virginia. A case of mistaken identity with another John Doe. I discovered that my parents had passed away, that you had married a doctor named Thomas Whitaker, that you had a daughter and a life that no longer had room for a ghost. What right did I have to resurrect myself? To upend the life you'd built from the ashes of our tragedy? I convinced myself that staying dead was a final act of love. I married a local woman, Maria, who knew my strange story and loved me anyway. We had 3 sons who never knew their father was once James Calloway from Virginia. Maria died of pneumonia in 1998, and I've lived alone since then, surrounded by my woodworking and memories of 2 lives, 2 loves. As my own death approaches, cancer. Isn't it ironic? I find I cannot leave this earth with you still believing I abandoned you, or was taken violently without a trace. The truth is both simpler and more complex. I was lost, then found, but too late to return to you without causing more pain than healing. I've lived a good life, Mary. I hope you have too. The enclosed journal contains the memories as they return to me over the years. Perhaps it will answer questions this letter leaves open. If nothing else, know that I have loved you across time and distance, and that love has been both my greatest joy and deepest regret. Yours, in this life and whatever comes after, James. I read the letter 7 times that first day. Then I started on the journal, page after page of James's memories returning, fragments of our life together emerging from the fog of his injury, sketches of my face drawn with increasing accuracy as his memory improved. The last entry was dated just 2 months before the package arrived. It took me 3 days to read the entire journal. When I finished, I sat on my porch overlooking the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore. I felt strangely peaceful. James hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't been murdered. He had been lost and found and lost again, living a parallel life to mine, loving me from afar as I had loved him. I called Lily that evening, asked her to come for the weekend. I needed to share this with someone who would understand, someone who had grown up in the shadow of James's ghost. So he was alive all this time, she said, when I finished showing her everything. Do you wish he had found you sooner? Before you met Dad? I thought about this carefully. No, I said finally. James was right. It would have been selfish to reappear once I had built a new life, and I wouldn't trade my life with your father, or you, for anything in this world. Are you going to try to find his family in Mexico? She asked. His sons? Again, I considered carefully. No, they have their own memories of their father. Finding out he had another identity, another love before their mother, it might hurt more than heal. James made his choice to protect everyone involved. I'll honor that choice. I did make one connection, though. Through the church mission mentioned in James's letter, I sent a small package to Manuel, the caretaker. Inside was a thank you note and a photo of James and me at the county fair in 1965, our whole lives ahead of us. I wanted someone in his Mexican life to know that he had been loved deeply before tragedy rewrote his story. I never received a reply, but somehow knew the package had reached its destination. The strangest part of finally knowing the truth was how little it changed things. The young man I had loved was still gone. The life we had planned still never happened. But the aching question that had lived in my heart for nearly 50 years was finally answered. And there was profound relief in that. I keep James's journal and letter in the same box as his old love letters now. Sometimes I read them all in chronological order. Our beginning, our abrupt end, and the long, separate journeys that followed. It feels like completing a circle somehow. I'm 78 now, and I've loved 2 good men in my lifetime. One was taken from me by cruel chance and returned too late. The other chose me, healed me, and gave me a family before cancer took him away. Both taught me that love doesn't die. It transforms, evolves, finds new ways to sustain us. If there's anything I've learned from this long, strange journey, it's that closure isn't always what we imagine it to be. Sometimes it's just knowing enough to make peace with the not knowing. Sometimes it's realizing that every love story ends, one way or another, but that doesn't diminish its beauty or its impact on our lives. Oh my goodness, I've been talking your ear off for quite a while now. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, You must be as stubborn as I am. I'd love to know what you thought or if my story touched you in any way. Please leave a comment below. And if you'd like to hear more stories from this old lady's life, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It warms my heart to know these memories aren't just fading away with me, but finding new life in your hearts too. Life is full of unexpected chapters, my dears. Even when you think the book is finished, sometimes there's an epilogue waiting to be discovered. Thank you for listening to mine.